not daring to be impolite. In this case, these well-dressed people were honest after all. She took it as a good sign that he said to her, "It's a fine programme this afternoon, is it not?" For this was a remark with which he had originally opened before the umbrella intervened. "The Beethoven's fine," said Margaret, who was not a female of the encouraging type. "I don't like the Brahms, though, nor the Mendelssohn that came first, and ugh! I don't like this Elgar that's coming." "What?" called Herr Lickschig, overhearing. "The pomp and circumstance will not be fine?" "Oh, Margaret, you tiresome girl!" cried her aunt. "Here have I been persuading Herr Lickschig to stop for pomp and circumstance, and you are undoing all my work. I am so anxious for him to hear what we are doing in music. Oh, you mustn't run down our English composers, Margaret." "For my part, I have heard the composition at Stettin," said Fräulein Musbach, "on 2 occasions. It is dramatic, a little." "Frida, you despise English music. You know you do, and English art, and English literature, except Shakespeare, and he's a German." "Very well, Frida, you may go." The lovers laughed and glanced at each other, moved by a common impulse. They rose to their feet and fled away from pomp and circumstance. "We have this call to play in Finsbury Circus, it is true," said Herr Lickschig, as he edged past her and reached the gangway just as the music started. "Margaret!" loudly whispered by Aunt Julie. "Margaret, Margaret! Fraulein Musbach has left her beautiful little bag behind on the seat." Sure enough, there was Frida's reticule, containing her address book, her pocket dictionary, her map of London, and her money. "Oh, what a bother! What a family we are! Frida!" "Hush!" said all those who thought the music was fine. "But it's the number they want in Finsbury Circus. Might I? Couldn't I?" said the suspicious young man, and got very red. "Oh, I would be so very grateful." He took the bag, money clinking inside it, and slipped up the gangway with it. He was just in time to catch them at the swing door, and he received a pretty smile from the German girl, and a fine bow from her cavalier. He returned to his seat upsides with the world. The trust that they had reposed in him was trivial, but he felt it cancelled the mistrust for them, and that probably he would not be had over his umbrella. This young man had been had in the past, badly, perhaps overwhelmingly, and now most of his energies went in defending himself against the unknown. But this afternoon, perhaps on account of music, he perceived that one must slack off occasionally, or what is the good of being alive? Wickham Place W, though a risk, was as safe as most things, and he would risk it. So when the concert was over, and Margaret said, "We live quite near, and I'm going there now. Could you walk around with me, and we'll find your umbrella?" He said, "Thank you," peaceably, and followed her out of Queen's Hall. She wished that he was not so anxious to hand a lady downstairs, or to carry a lady's programme for her. His class was near enough to her own, for that matter, to vex her. But she found him interesting on the whole. Everyone interested the Schlegels on the whole at that time, and while her lips talked culture, her heart was planning to invite him to tea. "How tired one gets after music," she began. "Do you find the atmosphere of Queen's Hall oppressive?" "Yes, horribly." "But surely the atmosphere of Covent Garden is even more oppressive." "Do you go there much?" "When my work permits, I attend the gallery for the Royal Opera." Helen would have exclaimed, "So do I. I love the gallery," and thus have endeared herself to the young man. Helen could do these things, but Margaret had an almost morbid horror of drawing people out, of making things go. She had been to the gallery at Covent Garden, but she did not attend it, preferring the more expensive seats. Still less did she love it, so she made no reply. "This year I have been 3 times. To Faust, Tosca, and—" Was it Tannhäuser or Tannhäuser? Better not risk the word. Margaret disliked Tosca and Faust, and so, for one reason and another, they walked on in silence, chaperoned by the voices of Mrs. Munt, who was getting into difficulties with her nephew. "And I do in a way remember the passage, Tibby, but when every instrument is so beautiful, it is difficult to pick out one thing rather than another." I am sure that you and Helen take me to the very nicest concerts. Not a dull note from beginning to end. I only wish that our German friends would have stayed till it finished." "But surely you haven't forgotten the drum steadily beating on the low C, Aunt Julie," came Tibby's voice. "No one could. It's unmistakable." "A specially loud part?" hazarded Mrs. Munt. "Of course I do not go in for being musical," she added, the shot failing. "I only care for music, a very different thing. But still I will say this for myself. I do know when I like a thing and when I don't. Some people are the same about pictures. They can go into a gallery, Miss Condor can, and say straight off what they feel all around the wall. I could never do that. But music is so different to pictures to my mind. When it comes to music I am as safe as houses, and I assure you, Tibby, I am by no means pleased by everything. There was a thing, something about a faun in French, which Helen went into ecstasies over, but I thought it most tinkling and superficial, and said so, and I held my opinion too." "Do you agree?" asked Margaret. "Do you think music is so different to pictures?" I should have thought so. I kind of," he said. "So should I. Now my sister declares they're just the same. We have great arguments over it. She says I'm dense, and I say she's sloppy. Getting under way, she cried, "Now doesn't it seem absurd to you? What is the good of the arts if they're interchangeable? What is the good of the ear if it tells you the same as the eye? Helen's one aim is to translate tunes into the language of painting and pictures into the language of music. It's very ingenious, and she says several pretty things in the process. But what's gained, I'd like to know? Oh, it's all rubbish, radically false. If Monet's really Debussy and Debussy's really Monet, neither gentleman is worth his salt. That's my opinion." Evidently these sisters quarrelled. "Now this very symphony that we've just been having, she won't let it alone. She labels it with meanings from start to finish, turns it into literature. I wonder if the day will ever return when music will be treated as music. Yet I don't know. There's my brother behind us. He treats music as music, and oh my goodness, he makes me angrier than anyone, simply furious. With him I daren't even agree." An unhappy family of talented. "But of course the real villain is Wagner. He has done more than any man in the 19th century toward the muddling of arts. I do feel that music is a very serious state just now, though extraordinarily interesting. Every now and then in history there do come these terrible geniuses like Wagner, who stir up all the wells of thought at once. For a moment it's splendid, such a splash as never was. But afterwards such a lot of mud, and the wells, as it were, they communicate with each other too easily now, and not one of them will run quite clear. That's what Wagner's done." Her speeches fluttered away from the young man like birds. If only he could talk like this, he would have caught the world. Oh, to acquire culture! Oh, to pronounce foreign names correctly! Oh, to be well informed, discoursing in ease at every subject that the lady started! But it would take one years. With an hour at lunch and a few shattered hours in the evening, how was it possible to catch up with leisured women who had been reading steadily from childhood? His brain might be full of names. He might have even heard of Monet and Debussy. The trouble was that he could not string them together into a sentence. He could not make them tell. He could not quite forget about his stolen umbrella. Yes, the umbrella was the real trouble. Behind Monet and Debussy the umbrella persisted, with the steady beat of a drum. "I suppose my umbrella will be all right," he was thinking. "I don't really mind about it. I will think about the music instead. I suppose my umbrella will be all right." Early in the afternoon he had worried about seats. Ought he to have paid as much as 2 shillings? Earlier still he had wondered, "Shall I try to do without a programme?" There had always been something to worry him ever since he could remember, always something that distracted him in the pursuit of beauty, for he did pursue beauty, and therefore Margaret's speeches did flutter away from him like birds. Margaret talked ahead, occasionally saying, "Don't you think so? Don't you feel the same?" And once she stopped and said, Oh, do